All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to give everybody a second here to get settled and get in. If you want to, while you're waiting for everybody to join, go ahead and in the chat, you can introduce yourself and share where you're joining us from today. It's always fun to see where everybody's joining us from. Just like I said, we've got, we'll give people just a minute or here to get started. All right, so my name is Jiva Daniker, and I'm the Virtual Events Manager here at FlexJobs, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Beverly Jones, who is the author of Find Your Happy at Work, and she is here to talk to us about how we can all be more happy in our careers, and whether that means changing jobs or not. Just a couple of housekeeping things while we're waiting to get started here. This is being recorded, so you will all get a link to the recording and resources that we're sharing. So make sure to look for that in your email. It will come directly to your email. And I also just wanted to put in a plug for the FlexJobs Virtual Career Fair, which is coming up here in the next week or so, actually. And I'll also put a link to that when we send out the recording. But if anybody has not signed up for that or is interested, that's a great opportunity to actually meet with employers and look for jobs. So excited for that as well. So I just want to give a brief introduction of Beverly. Beverly works with leaders and all different sizes of organizations and teams to really help negotiate career transitions, to work through challenges, and she's a facilitator, speaker, and obviously a writer. So she can share a little bit more about her background and kind of what has led her here. I'll also put a link into her new book, The Find Your Happy at Work. So we will put a link to that in the bio as well. But Beverly, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, I'm excited to be here. It sounds like we've got a good group. I'm watching people coming in from all over the place.
Yeah, this will be great. So I think it's really interesting because this conversation that we're having today is super timely. You know, we've talked a lot about over the last year. Who could have imagined a global pandemic and just remote work is changing, flexible jobs are changing. Now we have this whole concept of hybrid. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has really done, for better or for worse, is have, people are examining their lives, examining their jobs, and kind of stopping and going, wow, is this really what I want in my life? Is this what I want in my career? A huge number of people, I think we said a third of people, are actually looking for career changes and wanting to maybe change jobs and thinking about all of those kinds of things. So what can you, just to kind of, I guess, start off the conversation here a little bit, when we're talking about changing jobs and, this huge kind of new wave, I guess, that we're experiencing right at the moment. What can you tell us about people who are looking for job changes? Do you have to change jobs to be happy at work? What are some of the things that you've kind of, been learning about?
Well, you don't have to change jobs. You don't have to do anything in particular. There's so many different ways to change your relationship with work. It doesn't mean changing jobs is a bad idea, but it's not something you have to do. So much of the unhappiness during COVID, but for years and years and years and years, forever maybe, about work, isn't even so much about the job. It's about how you feel about the job and the way you take yourself to the job and how you manage yourself. Where we are now is, I think we've had maybe a national aha moment in which people have realized life is short. I want to have a full life. And I was unhappy for years, and I don't have to be. So I think where we are now is people don't want to be unhappy. They're realizing they don't have to be. They can make choices, but it's hard to figure out how to get started in taking control of your career. So I kind of think that's where we are. We're sort of at a brink of a lot of people discovering an entirely new relationship with work.
Yeah, that's really, it's been amazing, I think, to see the different conversations and sort of be a part of that, like you said, a national, maybe even global conversation, I think, that's happening. And I should mention, while we're talking, the chat is there for everybody to share their own ideas, thoughts. If you have questions, go ahead and those in the Q&A section. I'll be kind of monitoring that. I'm sorry if we don't get to everyone's question. I know I know there might be a lot, so I will do my best to get to as many questions as we can, but please feel free to engage in the chat and share your own thoughts and ideas and opinions. We really want this to be kind of an interactive and group conversation and discussion. Beverly, I'm curious, sort of, with the book, I love the finding your happy idea, and I'm curious what led you to that. Like, what is, can you tell us a little bit about your own career journey, your own personal interest, and what kind of got you curious about this topic? And
well, if you'll indulge me, since I want to talk just a little bit about the process of change, I'd like to go back way in history and tell you how I got into the idea of taking charge of your career. I have been at this for a very long time. So we're going way back in the 70s when I was a student at Ohio University, and I worked for the newspaper, and I had gigs on the radio. So I had a bit of an opportunity to step into leadership. But I found myself getting more and more and more angry as looking around for jobs after school and thinking about opportunities as a journalist. I was told women can't be journalists. They can work on the women's page. They can write about cooking. I was thinking about law school, and schools had didn't accept women, or maybe they had a 3% limit to women in the class. And I found myself getting frustrated, and I thought, I have to do something. I did not think I could contribute to change, but I thought I had to do it for myself. So I remembered something that I had done when I was about 13 or 14 years old. And those days I got a gig at LaSalle's department store in Toledo, Ohio, working in the fashion office for minimum wage. I mean, how cool is that as a young teenager to work in a fashion office and get paid for it?
Totally.
But the problem was I wasn't one of those tall, gorgeous teenagers who could wear wedding gowns. I was tiny, and my secret to success as a model is that I could pass as being 12 years old. So while the big, beautiful, tall girls were all dressed up in evening dresses, I dressed up like a little kid and I could pass. And so I was very important because I was the only one who could. But at that time, I started worrying about weight because, I mean, I really had to be skinny to keep doing this. And then my family, they're a bunch of Brits, and so we always had tea every day after work, and I maybe would have 3 teaspoons of sugar in it. And I thought, oh, well, this is what I have to do to not gain weight is I've got to have less sugar. But I can't live my life in this household without drinking tea, and I can't have tea without sugar. One day I was looking at the sugar bowl, and I got a spoon and I put it up and looked at it, and I thought, oh, you know what? If I were to just take one little grain, I bet I wouldn't even miss it tomorrow. Then maybe if I did it again, and then very gradually, I could learn to drink tea without sugar and I wouldn't even miss it. So that's what I did. It took months and months, but I learned to drink tea without any sugar, and it was no pain, but there was huge gain for me. So take us back to the 70s. I made a pledge to myself that I was going to do one thing every day, as long as I stayed at Ohio University, to support the proposition that women are equally able as men to be educated, to have professional jobs, and to make a contribution in the world. And I didn't think I could do anything much to change the world, but I thought at least it would make me feel better. So I started doing like a little tiny thing, raise my hand in class, or write a story or something like that. But as I needed to keep doing one thing a day, I had to get more creative and push myself a little bit out of my comfort zone. So I started volunteering to speak, and then I started volunteering to speak at really hard places like the local bar association, which was all men. And I had regular radio shows and all kinds of things. I became the first woman in the MBA program. And around then we had a new president, and he was pretty supportive of women in professional jobs. I think maybe because his wife was first in their class in Northwestern Law School, and he was only second. So he wanted to do something. And one day I got this summons. I was working for the radio station and doing business school part-time. And I got the summons to the president's office, and I thought, oh, I'm in trouble now. But he said that he was tired of hearing me, but he wanted to put all my complaints and energy to good use. So he hired me for a year to work on a project which was to document the status of women at Ohio University. And I looked at everything from faculty salaries to the student experience to ridiculous requirements like there could be no women in the marching band and all kinds of things. I spent an entire year doing that report. This was before Title IX. So all of it was quite legal, and in some cases, like the difference in, say, housekeepers in the dorms, under state law at a state university, men got, let's say, $10. That's not the number, but for round number, they got $10. And if men got $10, women only got about $6.50, and that was the state standard. So anyway, I wrote about all of those things. He didn't ask for my recommendations at the end, but he got them. I gave him 21 recommendations. He accepted 18 of them, and he hired me full time. And I'm like, I don't remember, 23 years old. I knew nothing about leadership. I knew nothing about higher education except what any other undergraduate had learned. But I was passionate and absolutely had no doubt about the proposition of the equality of women. So he said, I'm going to make you my assistant. There's this stuff before Congress. We want to get ahead of it. We want to do it before we have to. And I want you to start helping women move into jobs that they haven't generally been allowed to be in. So that was my first big time job. And I had no background. I had a lot of people who thought that was ridiculous to hire a 23-year-old to do that. Some people thought, well, he doesn't really care, and other people just thought it was funny. But what I did was I used the sugar grain principle. I used it for myself and thinking, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to take an action step or two every day. But part of my job was working with women, faculty members and graduate students and people who are more educated and smarter than I was to help them shift their careers. And basically what I do is we'd sit down, we'd think about what they wanted, we'd make a list of the things they wanted, and I would make them make a commitment to me. And I would say, you're doing it for all women, to every day take a step. And so I started then in that change process. Eventually I went off to law school, I became a corporate executive and a lawyer and did lots of other things. But during all that time, sort of my thing was working with other people to create change, not just women, not just young people, but working with people who wanted to recreate their work lives. And so eventually when I was able, I took very early retirement from my corporate job and stopped being a lawyer. And I've been working with people ever since on how to reframe, redescribe their careers. And it's a pretty simple process, but I've got about 50 years of experience now, and I know it works. So that's
fantastic.
My background.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love it's such a powerful lesson, right? That idea that I think we sometimes get so wrapped up in you have to do big things and big change, and it can be so daunting. And I think the idea that just doing those little incremental things can be so powerful, and then before you even realize it, you've actually made the big change or you've made a really significant step forward. But it helps to kind of take those little bite-sized chunks sometimes.
It really does. But there are a couple of other pieces that I'd like to mention to the process. Aside from doing the action steps, there's some things that give it some structure. In the packets, I believe, that people can download, there's a description of the process. And so I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but if anybody's interested in the process, it's there. But this is
Yeah, and I'll just mention really quick that it's in the handout section. If anybody is interested, there is a there's a handout section, and one of the worksheet that Beverly is referring to is there, and you can actually download that, and we'll also include it in the recording when we send that out. But definitely want to take a look, and actually I can share a picture of it too. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Beverly.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Basically, I'll just kind of go through there are 5 steps, and then after that, maybe we can talk about what some of the classic steps are that can get you started. The first thing is make a list of the things you want. It doesn't always seem easy. We often think, oh, I want different things, but I don't know what they are. But if you just write down the things that you do know that you want, and then the things you don't like about your current situation, and turn those negatives into a positive. If you don't want to keep working alone, then what you want is some engagement with people. So you make a list is the first step of the things that you do know, even though you don't have a very specific idea. And the next thing you do is you sort of organize that mix of things into a few goals. In the handout, I suggest using a mind map, which is well, let's see, I think I actually have a picture of what a mind map looks like. It's kind of a hub and like a hub of a wheel, and then branches going out. It's there if you want it, but it's not required to use a mind map. The idea is just to take all of these things and put them in some categories. Like, I encourage people who are thinking about making a change to think about what they want to be like, to kind of envision themselves. Maybe they want to be more fit. Maybe they want to be more energetic. Maybe they want to be more calm. So it's not just about your skills, it's what you want to be like. So put those into a few goals. Maybe a common one is I want to develop new expertise. I want to be more fit. I want to have a wider network so that I can get jobs. And that would be a pretty common pattern.
Yeah, and I'll just add to one of the things that we've found works really well too for that kind of thing is thinking about people you really admire, right? And what are the kind of characteristics or, beyond sort of maybe their skill set, but really like what do they embody that you say, wow, that's, I'd really like to do that, or I'd really like to be like that. I think sometimes people we admire, we have more in common with people that we admire than we want to admit or we're willing to admit. But I think sometimes that helps, like you said, those categories that you were talking about and kind of looking at what are some of those things.
That's a really good suggestion. Sometimes with clients, I ask them to think about 3 of their favorite leaders, and it could be the President of the United States or their Sunday school teacher, just people whose leadership style they liked, and then make a list of the characteristics of the 3. Very often they're overlapping characteristics, and say, on your list, are there any of those characteristics you want? And that's a very good way to get at just what you were talking about. So once you have some ideas of what you want to work toward, the trick is, what are your sugar grains? Because we're going to apply the sugar grain process here. The idea is to do small action steps consistently. And the trick is absolutely committing yourself to a cadence that continues. It's not enough to do like 5 in one day and then don't do anything for a month, because that never continues. It's really finding that point. For me, just a grain of sugar, I couldn't taste the difference. Whatever the pain point is, stop just before that, and decide if you're in the middle of a search, it might be urgent. You're going to do a lot of things every day. If you're just thinking you want to make a little shift, maybe not so much, but decide your pace and decide how much time and effort you're going to put into it. And then start making list of what those things might be. So, and we can talk a little more in a bit about some of the things. Networking is always part of it, as I said. Fitness, I love the idea of developing leadership characteristics. There are all kinds of things you can do to help yourself feel more confident and more happy. Whatever those things are, whatever the categories are, start a list of things, and I call them things because step kind of suggests something linear in a path. It's really, actions that are not necessarily related to one another. Make lists of things, short list to get started for each of your goals, and then commit yourself to maybe one a day. Every work day would be a common pattern. And here's the thing that really matters. It seems to work much better, just like with dieting or project management. It works much better if you keep track of things. You have to write them down. You can use a spreadsheet, or you can use any kind of log. You can also, if you do journaling at the same time, that's a really terrific way to kind of keep track of what you're learning. But that's the structure. You find something to aim for, you start looking for small things that'll take you there, your sugar grains of progress, and you hold yourself accountable. And you don't do it for endless periods. You do it for a month, and then you celebrate, and then you do it again. And that's really
Yeah.
what it's all about. And so the next thing that we can really talk about is what some of those things might be, and that's what the book is all about. It's 50 chapters of things you can do to move yourself forward and to be happier.
I love that. And we had a comment from Yvette who was talking. I think this is so important that she said, she's looking for a new job and she's not so much worried about being qualified for a job, but realizing that she's fearing or avoiding the unhappiness that can come with work. And she also mentioned she spent her freshman year at Ohio University. So you have a fellow, Ohioan. I don't know what, but I think that's so important, right? Because I think often, especially with, if you're thinking about changing jobs or those kinds of things, it's easy to just lump everything in together of like, oh, I don't like this, or I don't like that, or that unhappiness factor. And I think one of the things that we've seen a lot is that, and I've experienced this a lot, and there's another webinar that I'll share too that people might find interesting, but is around what really drains you and what gives you energy. And I think that's one of those things that, when you talk about finding your happy at work, it's sometimes easy to just say, oh man, I don't like this job, right? Or I don't like, this kind of whole encompassing thing. But it's much more useful and helpful, I think, if you can really break that down and look a little bit more closely at the exact elements that are making you unhappy, and really pinpoint specifically what those things are, because you may find that it's actually not the role itself, it's other components or it's very specific parts of that role. But you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you're saying. And like any other project, you start with the data and you observe as you go. But I have a little tool that I use in my own head, for my own state of being at any time. And I use it with clients, and I also use it with clients who are leaders and who are trying to help their employees be more engaged. I call this the engagement triangle. Basically, particularly in writing these books, I've just read everything I can about employee engagement and what makes people happy. And it seems that the bulk of commentary and psychological research and long history comes down to three factors. And if you can kind of keep track of those factors, and if you're trying to gauge yourself, ask questions about them, you will have a much better idea of where things are going right and where they're going wrong. The factors are basically, one of them is purpose. It is, what is your purpose in work? What do you want out of it? What are your value systems? What's the purpose of this organization? What's the purpose of this job description you have? What's the purpose of the team you're working on? Is there an alignment? If there's not an alignment, it doesn't mean that you have to leave immediately. Sometimes people are doing a job for an organization that they don't really love, but their purpose is they're feeding their family, or they're saving up for graduate school, or whatever it is. As long as you know why you're working and you know your values and you're able to use your values to guide you, you can make yourself happier there. But it gets much better if you find people who share the same values and the same mission. And if you can find something in the organization that you can really get behind and have that be part of your guidance, that can make a huge difference. So purpose, and by that I mean mission, and values, and why you get up in the morning to go to work. The next thing is people. And of course, people and values are often linked, but human beings are sort of hardwired to engage with other people. We're constantly aware of them. Even if you're an introvert, you think about them a lot and you need relationships. Our ancestors survived because they learned how to collaborate the way other animals didn't. Human beings learn to work together, and that's built into our DNA. And if we are out of sync with other humans, if we aren't able to collaborate, if we're not in contact, that can make us very sad. Sometimes loneliness is a huge part of what feels like burnout or unhappiness in the job. And it's not necessarily the work itself. And if loneliness is a part of it, you can find relationships in other part of your life. But it's not just loneliness and connection. It's also, who are the people you're serving? Are you working hard to deliver a service that's really meaningful to somebody else? Who are the stakeholders you're serving? Who are the colleagues whose work you're making better because you're there? If you can see all of the people who are in the value chain, as well as all of the people you have contact with, and then maybe the people that the job will give you an opportunity to meet if you exert yourself, that can make you a lot happier. All of a sudden, your work will take on more meaning and you create opportunities for fun anytime you're talking with other people. And then finally, it's process, it's productivity, it's how you actually do the work. When you think about the nature of work, it's not that different from play. When you think about yourself as a kid and maybe you were playing softball or tennis and you were learning how to do it or learning how to ride a bike, you really threw yourself into it. For you as a kid, play was your job and you knew how to engage in it. And for adults, there's very often things that we do in our hobbies where we can totally engage but it would be work to somebody else. I like to work in the garden. I like to cook. Both of those things my husband regards as drudgery, but it is play for me. So what you want to do is notice the aspects of the job that you like the most and really kind of organize your energy to see if you can perfect what you're doing, if you can build expertise. The things that are dull and repetitive and boring, maybe you can turn them into a game. But if you choose how you go about your work, even you may have tasks you have to accomplish, and you may have a standard you have to reach, but you can choose how you approach those tasks, including the attitude you bring to bear. So if you look at those three things, kind of like pretty regularly, maybe that could be one of your sugar grains is at least once a week, go through your triangle. It gives you a kind of a framework to get more specific about what the problems are, and that'll help you think of things to do to create the change.
Yeah, I love that. There's some really great ideas in there, and I think we have a couple of things in the chat that I definitely want to bring up here in just a minute, which I think is important. I think one thing that you said too that really resonated with me is this idea that especially in Western culture, and maybe this is, I don't know if it's an American thing or whatever, but I think we have this idea that everything, all of our purpose, all of our value, all of our everything kind of revolves around work and revolves around our job. And I think one of the things that you touched on, which is really important, is that purpose piece and, recognizing that we're probably not going to get everything we need to kind of make our whole, life experience into work, right? And it's really easy to kind of live your job and have that be your sole existence. And I think it's really also important to recognize that oftentimes we're not going to get everything we need, whether it's the connection or the community piece or some of those. There are just going to be some of those elements that maybe don't come from our job, and so, or the role that we have. And so, really prioritizing what those things are, what we can get from the role that we have, what we can get, and I'm sorry if my video is freezing here, but what we can get from our job, what we can get from our work, and then where we might also find other things to, fill some of those needs and those gaps that you're talking about.
You're totally right about that. There's so much more to life, but there's also good news from a job perspective. Going back to how we evolved, we were not evolved to work night and day. We were evolved to not do marathons, but to kind of sprint and then to find new energy by doing other things. So if you really want to be successful, if work is really important, then go after it in a smart way. And that is to give yourself breaks, give yourself variety, give yourself new sources of inspiration and intellectual curiosity and take care of yourself. All of those things will help to make you happier. And the happier you are, the greater likelihood is that you're going to be successful in your career, because a positive attitude is really very important in allowing you to do your best work, and certainly to engage with other people and to be creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that leads us into one of the things you talk about in the book, is the importance of learning and always kind of having, I love the idea, if anyone's heard of the idea of a growth mindset, and just the importance of keeping yourself kind of in that constantly wanting to learn and grow and learn new things. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that?
Yes, it's my favorite tip. It's my favorite thing. If I'm kind of bogged down or a client doesn't know what to do next, an easy go-to thing, if you want to make a change today and you don't know how, it's to learn something new. We are at our best when we're curious, when we're excited about discovering something. And if we're learning, we get that sense of curiosity and we get that little aha that kind of comes like a little prize when we learn something new. So one of the things that learning does is help to push you into a more of a positive growth mindset. But there are also all kinds of practical reasons for learning. If you're a person who likes to learn, if you're curious, it can help you become a better listener. And if you're a better listener, you're going to be better at working with colleagues, with collaborating, with networking. If you are somebody who is committed to learning, even some things that are tedious but are related to your field or you think are important, it's going to help you with career resilience, because you're going to be ahead of the curve. You're not going to become obsolete because your job goes away. You're going to always have something in the back burner. You're always going to be finding new things to do. People who are learning are more interesting and able to make connections in conversations with other people. So being in a kind of a learning mode helps you connect with in a conversation. But part of it is just that if you are attuned to learning, if you kind of have keep that part of your brain alive, you're going to spot opportunities that you otherwise can't. There's so much information all around us in the workplace and just in life. There are opportunities that are not quite formed. There are new ideas. There are trends that are in one place and could come over here. And we can only handle so much information, so our brains kind of naturally filter out things that aren't immediately relevant to what we're doing. But if you've put yourself into a learning state, it's so you've opened up your filters. You're shining a light on the world around you, and your brain is literally allowing you to bring more information in and sort it out. So a learning mindset, a growth mindset, an awareness of what's going on in the world is the best thing that you can do uh, to kind of do a bit of a turnaround and to be more on an upward spiral.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great point. We have some good comments coming in here about learning new things being good for physical and mental health. People loving that point about it also helps us make connections with others in conversation. Um, Wanted to get, and this is kind of, I guess, tying into both the learning but also kind of a career transition point. And I apologize, I had to turn off my video here for a second. I'll try and get it back here in a minute. But we had a comment or a question from a woman named Patricia. She says, I'm 57 years old and I need to make a career change. My transferable skills may apply to several different paths. And for some of it, I need additional training. I don't know which job I would be happy with. I really like the sugar grain concept, but I don't feel like I have time or financial resources to waste. How would you figure out what the best option would be and what some of those maybe next steps are?
Well, you always start where you are. I don't know what your situation is, but you start at the things that are nearby and easy and accessible. Right now, along with remote work, there's so many remote training operations going on in companies. People are having a hard time hiring other people with the skills they want. So many companies are providing their own training programs. Universities are opening kinds of training programs of all sorts that to people who don't have a relationship with that college and they're not working to a degree. There are lots of options out there as you start to look. So, and somebody in your situation, I would look and see what's accessible and what is something that you could put to use as quickly as possible. Sometimes one of the ways people move toward a new career is look around at something that would be useful in the situation they are in now, get a new skill, offer to take on a task, offer to introduce it in their current work. And another way they sometimes do it is to find some kind of small side gig when they can try it out, or they take the skill into a volunteer capacity. So you can do two things at once, or several things, to find something that is accessible, can get you going, and it may not be where you ultimately want to go. But as soon as you start adding to your capabilities, you're going to maybe spot the next step and get some momentum going.
Yeah, I love that. And from also a practical standpoint, I just wanted to throw out, if anybody hasn't heard of the concept of returnships, this is something that's kind of a new, well, I don't know that it's super new, but it's specifically geared towards folks who have been out of the workforce for a little while and maybe wanting to change careers. They have returnships now. I know Amazon and Facebook are some of the big companies that are doing these, but especially for potentially older workers who are going back into a new career or want to change careers, and they're actually doing them as remote concepts too. So the idea is it's an internship, but it's for folks who actually do have experience, maybe just in a different field or the same field, but earlier in their career, those kinds of things. So that might be something. We have a webinar as well about returnships, so I can share that as well. And we had another question that came in that I want to touch on here about getting a wider network. So obviously when you're talking about a career change, especially if you're changing, career fields, having that network, I think you touched on that, Beverly, is so important in meeting new people. What do you suggest for how to get a wider network and what, for somebody who is looking for a career change?
Well, one thing you do is you start where you are. I mean, we all know that right now COVID is still lingering and it's not easy to go to conventions and things like that, but it's not necessary either. Your network includes all the people that you have had contact with. I kind of like to think about networks as, I don't know, you could map them out like with a bullseye and concentric circles out. And the circle that's the bullseye are the people you know really well. And taking care of that part of the network is kind of nurturing, getting in touch with people maybe you don't see so much, um, finding yourself more comfortable asking for help, asking those people to introduce you, letting them know what you're interested in. The next circle out is tends to be people who are your friends, but you don't see so often. In there are opportunities to connect, to set up a coffee, to go to events, to anything that'll just get you out of your patterns and engage with people who you're not super close with gives you the possibility of meeting somebody new. So getting started doesn't have to mean focusing in on just people in your field. I can't tell you how many clients kind of started where they were. I'm thinking of one woman who was very shy, and she finally decided that she was going to start talking with people in her yoga class at the end of class when people chatted. Finally, she got the nerve up to ask somebody out for coffee. And she mentioned she was looking for such and such kind of job. And that woman said, "Oh, we just got an opening." And with 2 weeks of her first coffee chat, she had an offer. So they can happen in surprising ways. So start where you are. And those further circles out are people who maybe went to the same university, maybe worked at the same company, maybe live in your neighborhood, maybe they have an interest. Dog training is one where I've seen people make connections that lead to jobs. So start with people with whom you have an affinity, an affiliation, or a geographic. They're convenient, and look for ways to build relationships. Now that's different from highly targeted, using LinkedIn to research people in a specific field, but really it's the master networkers count every person as potentially an important relationship, and look for ways along all of these efforts to help the people they come across. The real great networkers are constantly looking for ways to add value and help another person, and it's those kind of interactions that very often lead them to opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'll just put in a plug. I shared it in the chat as well. We actually have a webinar specifically about networking coming up on September 23rd. So I put that in there, and anyone is welcome to sign up and attend that. But it's also about, we have a one about LinkedIn, and also, but the one that I'm sharing is about sort of beyond LinkedIn. So some of those connections, like Beverly was talking about, how do you maximize all those people around you? I think that's fantastic.
Can I just follow up on that with one other thing? And that is, you can also build your skill at small talk, which is important because it's how you create trust, or conversation generally, or kind of getting up the nerve to talk to strangers. You do that by the same thing. You start where you are. If you hate the idea of going to a big room where you don't know anybody, go to a room where you know a few people, or go to a coffee shop or your church or wherever it is, and figure out what makes you uncomfortable. If it's talking to somebody you don't know, or even somebody you don't know well, start practicing there. Your sugar grade is going to go just past is going just past your comfort zone and getting just slightly out of it. And so what you can do by pushing yourself into reaching out a little more without having trauma and anxiety that's just overwhelming, you can build your skill just a little bit at a time, so that it becomes easier to constantly be on the alert for interactions that might lead to relationships.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's fantastic. Um, oh, and I think this is an interesting question. We had one from Olivia. This is a fascinating one. She said, "What makes me uncomfortable is answering the question, what do you do when you're unemployed or in a career transition?" I think that's a really interesting idea of how do you answer that question of what do you do. That's a very common question, right, for people to ask you. So how would you suggest maybe answering that question if you're in transition or you're unemployed?
Well, you kind of think about what it is you want to put in your the about section on LinkedIn and your profile. Um, it's not the job that you have now or you used to have that defines who you are. It's it's the things you do on the job. It's your skill set. It's your occupation. And if you're in between occupations, you can say, um, I'm. You could describe your life now without going into detail, saying, well, right now I'm working with several projects that involve helping people do X, and that could be a volunteer thing you're doing. You don't have to give a job description. People typically don't want a job description if you're talking about casual networking, but they want an idea of kind of how you see yourself. You can um, refer to your last job and say, traditionally I've been in sales, but now I'm making a transition to executive coaching. You can mention the transition you might be going to, and you maybe just thought of it that morning, but it's still a transition potentially. So you don't have to give lots of specifics and angst about it. Just tell something about yourself and what you're interested in.
Yeah, and I think it can be really powerful to have that vulnerability, right, of just not knowing, right? And I think so many other people are in that position. One of the common uh, in the webinars and the chats that we do, having that community and that support of other people being in a similar situation and saying, hey, I am in transition or I'm looking for a new job. But I think that vulnerability piece that you talked about, Beverly, you don't have to have that answer, but I think sometimes that's really empowering to know that you don't have to have it all figured out.
And it's like that more than it ever has been.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be that, if you said you were out of a job, you'd worry, what did they think I did? Did I do something horrible? You'd have all of these imaginary fears about how people were judging you. Um, but nowadays, you don't have to even worry about it because so many people are in transitions. And in some ways, transitions are cool. I,
Mhm.
um, I think that clients who are older, and older is a relative term. And if you're in the tech field, that could be 40. If you're in executive coaching, I guess that could be, I don't know, 85. I know some 85 coaches in their 80s. So it's a relative term. But if you're talking about a transition, people find that exciting. It's cool to be in transition. It's cool to be 57 and thinking, you know what? I've had a great run, and now finding some new ways to repurpose these skills, and I'm really excited about the opportunities. So come up with some excitement about the fact that we're now in an era that nobody has to pretend that they're going to do the same thing for 50 years. It just doesn't make sense for anybody.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's really and it's a fun time too. I think when you are in career transition and someone asks you about that, it's a fun time to kind of try out how it feels to talk about a career transition, right? Or if you want to move into a new field and kind of, it's a fun time to kind of experiment with how that feels. You feel like you're putting on a new persona, but like you said, it's an exciting thing and something you should be proud of to say, hey, I'm new, I'm trying out this new thing. I'm exploring a new side of myself. I'm learning something new. I think that's a really powerful thing. So yeah.
People are going to judge you by your attitude, by that growth mindset,
Yeah.
um, by your enthusiasm, by the things that you're interested, even if they're not a job. They're not going to react negatively unless you seem sad or upset, and that maybe they're going to react empathetically if you're feeling sad and upset, but that isn't going to help you necessarily if what you're trying to do is generate some energy. Um, just say flat out, well, right now I'm making a change. I'm really having an interesting time. This is what I've always done, and I'm thinking about such and such.
Yeah,
But say it with
absolutely.
energy and like you are recognizing that this is an opportunity, you're in control of your career, and you have enough experience in life, you're going to make it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that advice. And I know we're coming up to the almost to the end of our time here, and I want to make sure we get to a couple of other the main points that you talk about in your book. And we sort of touched on this already, but you talked about this positive mindset, and I think a couple of the comments that I've seen in the chat, have to do with, oftentimes, especially if we're in a toxic work environment or, the job we have is really making us miserable. Obviously, there's certain things there that we don't want to ignore in terms of our own well-being or things like that, but can you talk a little bit about that, the positive mindset, why that's so important, what we can do to kind of help cultivate a positive mindset, and also this idea of well-being, and especially, like I said, when we're in kind of a really negative situation, what are some of the things that you recommend for people who may be in that circumstance?
Okay. Your positive mindset or negative mindset frames your day. It limits or expands what you see. It changes your relationship with other people. It makes it a day exciting or miserable. And the one thing, I know we're short of time, but I want to talk about the voice in your head. The quick story, in the worst period of my career, which was when I was putting myself through law school and I was in Washington, I didn't know anybody, and I thought I'd never get a job. And every day I'd kind of beat myself up and say, if I don't do great on this, I'll never get a job. They're never going to hire a woman, whatever it was. My brother was found to have a mass on his spine around that time, and we were told that if it turned out to be cancerous, he might only have a month to live because of where it was located. So he was rushed into a hospital and worried all night, thinking he's going to die. And the next morning, it turned out to be benign. And it's like my whole life changed, and everything was in perspective, and I realized life is good, and Washington's a wonderful place, and there's so many opportunities, and everything seemed trivial that I had been worried about. And I thought, oh my gosh, nothing has actually changed in my life. 3 days ago, I was the most depressed I've ever been, and I felt hopeless. And now I feel like there are opportunities. If I can do that because somebody survives something that's life threatening, why can't I do that in my own life? And I realized that what was making me feel so miserable was the way I was beating myself up in my head, that I was telling myself that it was going to be hard, it was going to be tough, nobody would hire me. And so I started fighting back that voice in my head and starting, writing down the negative things and reframing and kind of practicing a new voice in my head. And since then, I read a lot about it. There are a lot of books, and my book has some suggestions, but there's a lot of information out there. But I want people to know that there are two things that can help you manage. Well, there are many things, but two I want to mention. One is manage the voice in your head and manage your physical self. Manage how you take care of yourself. Manage, are you hunched up like this, or are you expansive when you stand? Manage how you feel in your body. Kind of roll your shoulders can make you feel better. Um, Exercise can make you feel better. So manage your physical self, manage the voice in your head, have those be the things that you're going to act on. And there's going to be change in your life, I promise.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And the physical part that you mentioned, I think, is so telling. I think we tend to squash that, right? But that whole idea of the gut feeling that you have, that's a real thing, and it tells us a lot. And sometimes we just pay so little attention to what our body is screaming at us to tell, and it can be such a clear signal that something isn't right, or the reverse, right? Things that make you feel so good, and give you that energy, give you that enthusiasm and that inspiration. And I think really tuning into that, just taking time to pause, to think about what those things are. And I love the voice in your head. The idea that one of my colleagues says, actually name that voice in your head. Give that that voice in your head a name, and then just say, you know what? Nope, I'm not going to listen to that. Just like you wouldn't kind of accept those kinds of comments or things from somebody else. So why accept them when they're in your head?
That's right. You make that voice go away, and you start talking to yourself the way you would to a dear friend.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I love that advice. All right. So I know we're almost out of time, and I want to make sure we get to any other questions that people have. I know we've had a couple of questions in the chat that we've been made, and I'm scrolling through here to make sure that I don't try and miss any. Somebody asked about book suggestions, so I know we can put some ideas of those in the recap. So Beverly, I'll make sure to connect with Beverly to get some ideas for, obviously Beverly's book has some great suggestions and ideas, so make sure to check that out, and then we can put together a list of some of the other resources as well. Any other final questions or comments from people? Or Beverly, do you have anything that you feel like we haven't touched on?
Well, I think my final comment is that just take action. Motivation, confidence, positivity tend to come by taking a little step. That makes you feel good if you've done something, and then that helps you take the next step. So we tend to freeze when we don't know what to do. If you can force yourself to just take a little step, even if you're not doing the process, you don't know where it's taking you, but a little action step that feels positive, that's a good starting point. And if just keep doing that every day.
I love that. I love that suggestion. And there's so many, Beverly and I were talking before we started about, there's so many good quotes about taking action. And just, I think we can't underestimate the power of how good that makes you feel sometimes when you just take that little step. And somebody in the chat was mentioning, crossing things off your to-do list and how good that feels, right? And so if you can take those little kind of small action steps and move forward and have those things that you say, yes, I have done that. I think that's a fantastic suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for joining today. I hope you all enjoyed this. I know I learned a lot. And Beverly, I want to say a huge thank you to you for joining us today. Thank you for all of your insights. I hope everybody here checks out your book. Again, I will send that link and all the resources that we sent today. But I just want to say thank you, a huge thank you to Beverly for joining us. And I know we have lots of thank yous coming in from the chats and the Q&A. So,
well, I love being here. I'm fine. I'm kind of getting used to doing this remotely. I still like being in a room with people, but it's so nice to connect with people from so many places, and it still feels like a community, doesn't it?
It does. It's a really nice thing, and I will share some of the other webinars and events that we have, as well as some of the information someone asked about career coaching. So I'll make sure to send that as well. And Beverly, I hope you come back and join us again. And to everyone who joined, thank you so much for joining, and we will see you all again very soon.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much, and I will get us out of here in just a moment. But thank you all so much for